The night Lillian Harper entered the moon trial, the moon did something it had never done for her before. It waited. She told herself the trembling in her hands was from the cold, because that was easier than admitting the truth, but the air outside the moon hall was not cold. It was a mild September night in northern Maine, the kind that carried the smell of pine sap, damp stone, and wood smoke from the village chimneys half a mile down the hill. The sky was clear enough that every star looked sharpened, and the full moon hung above the black roof of the hall like an eye that had opened only to watch her fail. Lillian stood at the base of the 12 stone steps and tried to breathe the way Mara had taught her, slow through the nose, slow out through the mouth, one breath at a time, until the world became small enough to survive. Behind her, the pack gathered in a crescent across the courtyard, their ceremonial cloaks silver at the edges, their whispers soft, but not soft enough. No wolf. No scent. No reason to be here. She had heard those words so many times they no longer arrived as sentences. They arrived as weather, as ordinary as rain tapping against a kitchen window, as familiar as the careful way people lowered their voices when she passed. An Omega with no wolf was not supposed to stand before the moon hall. She was not supposed to request trial rights, not supposed to step into the same circle where future lunars, heirs, and blood-bound warriors proved that the moon goddess recognized them. She was supposed to stay near the back, where the unwanted were easier to ignore. Lillian lowered her gaze to her hands. Her gloves were plain gray wool, worn thin at the fingertips, and beneath the left cuff was the small pale mark she had hidden since childhood, a crescent-shaped scar on the inside of her wrist. Her mother had once told her it came from a fever. Elder Marcus Vale had called it a birth flaw. The pack healer had looked at it only once before closing her ledger and saying some marks were better left unnamed. Lillian had believed them because children believe the adults who sound certain, and because believing them hurt less than asking why everyone seemed afraid of a scar that never ached except under moonlight. Tonight it ached. Not sharply. Not like pain. More like someone knocking from the other side of a locked door. The great doors of the moon hall opened with a slow groan, and warm candlelight spilled across the steps, gold over gray stone, soft over hard faces. At the top stood Serena Pike in white silk and silver thread, her dark blonde hair pinned with moonstones, her smile gentle in the way polished glass can look gentle before it cuts light. Beside her, Elder Marcus held the trial staff, his expression calm, official, almost bored. That was what frightened Lillian most. Not hatred. Hatred at least admitted she mattered. This was worse. This was the face of a man preparing to erase her from a record and call it order. Lillian took the first step. The whispers thinned. She took the second. Somewhere inside the hall, a bell gave one soft sound, though no hand had touched it. Elder Marcus stiffened, so quickly most people missed it. Lillian did not. For the first time that night, she forgot to be afraid. The bell should not have sounded for her. Everyone in Grey Hollow knew that, even the children, who had been lifted onto shoulders at the edge of the courtyard, so they could watch the trial begin. The moon hall bell was not made for arrivals. It rang for recognition, for bloodlines accepted, for wolves strong enough to answer the old light beneath the stones. Lillian knew this because she had spent most of her life studying the rules that had been used to keep her outside every door. At 7 years old, she had stood in the training yard while other children laughed in surprise at the first soft stirrings of their wolves, that strange bright moment when a young shifter felt another heartbeat answer inside the ribs. Lillian had waited for hers until the instructor looked away. At 10, she had placed her palm on the silver registry stone and watched it remain dull while the other Omega girls left glowing handprints that faded slowly, like moonlight sinking into water. At 13, during the first scenting ceremony, the matron had leaned close to Lillian, breathed once, and stepped back with an expression so carefully blank that it stayed with Lillian longer than any insult could have. No stable wolf trace, the matron had written. Classification pending. Pending had become limited. Limited had become unsuitable. Unsuitable had become the word people used when they wanted to sound kind while making sure she understood she did not belong. It was strange how a person could be erased without anyone raising their voice. A line crossed out in a ledger. A seat moved from the front row to the side wall. A winter supply token reduced because full pack benefits required full wolf registration. A polite smile from the council clerk when Lillian asked whether she could apply for healer training, followed by the careful turning of a page, and the phrase applicants must meet internal wolf stability standards. No one had thrown her away all at once. They had simply made the world smaller around her year by year, until she learned to fold herself into whatever space remained. Her mother had fought it quietly at first. Lillian remembered late nights in their small blue house at the end of Juniper Road, the kitchen smelling of peppermint tea and rain on the screens. Her mother bent over letters to the council with her hair falling loose from its braid. "There has been a mistake," she would say, not to Lillian exactly, but to the paper, to the walls, to anyone in the world still willing to listen. "My daughter is not empty." But after the winter Lillian turned 14, her mother stopped saying that where anyone could hear. The letters disappeared. The kitchen grew quieter. Elder Marcus Vale began visiting every month, always in the same dark coat, always removing his gloves finger by finger before sitting at their table as if patience were a form of ownership. He never shouted. He never needed to. He spoke in clean, official words that made fear sound like policy. Unregistered wolf. Unconfirmed bond potential. Restricted trial eligibility. Protective classification. He called it protection, so smoothly that Lillian almost missed the way her mother gripped the edge of the sink until her knuckles turned pale. After her mother died, the restrictions became facts no one bothered to explain. Lillian was assigned laundry work instead of apprenticeship. Her name was removed from the spring ceremony list. Her food allotment was marked independent, which meant smaller, colder, easier to forget. By the time she was 22, most of Grey Hollow did not think of her as someone being punished. They thought of her as someone who had naturally settled where she belonged. That was the cruelest part. The pack had grown comfortable with her absence before she was even gone. So when Elder Marcus lifted his staff at the top of the steps and told the crowd that the trial would proceed in proper order, Lillian understood the look in his eyes. He was not surprised by the bell because he believed in her. He was worried because something old had failed to obey him. Lillian had not chosen the trial. That was what the crowd did not know, and what Elder Marcus Vale had no intention of explaining while every important family in Grey Hollow stood beneath the white banners and pretended this night was about tradition. 3 days earlier, she had been in the laundry room behind the East Lodge, pressing council robes with steam rising warm against her face, when Mara Collins came through the back door with flour on her sleeves and fear in her eyes. Mara worked in the kitchens, where people forgot that quiet women with trays could hear more than councilmen with seals. She did not speak at first. She only crossed the room, took the iron from Lillian's hand, and set it upright before Lillian could ask why her best friend looked as though the floor had shifted under her. Then Mara said, very softly, "They are using you." Lillian had almost smiled at that, not because it was funny, but because it was old. Grey Hollow had been using her for years in small acceptable ways, for laundry no apprentice wanted, for errands that ended after dark, for seating arrangements, where someone unimportant needed to fill a gap and then disappear. But Mara shook her head before Lillian could answer. "Not like that," she said. "Tonight they approved the moon trial order. Serena Pike is first. You are second." Lillian remembered the room going strangely still around her, the hiss of The steam, the clean linen smell, the drip of melted snow from Mara's boots onto the stone floor. For a moment, the words had no shape. Serena Pike belonged in the moon trial. Serena had been raised for it, polished for it, praised since childhood as if the moon had personally written her name in silver thread. Lillian did not belong within 100 feet of the circle. She had said that out loud, but Mara only looked toward the closed door. That is the point. The elders need contrast. They need Serena to look chosen, not merely eligible. They want the hall to see what blessing is by placing it beside what they call failure. There were many ways to be humiliated. Lillian knew several of them by name. But this was different. This was not a whisper in a pantry, or a seat denied at supper. This was ceremony. This was record. Once the Moon Hall rejected her in front of witnesses, the council could change her classification from restricted to unsanctioned. Unsanctioned wolves, even ones without wolves, did not receive winter housing, pack protection, or legal standing inside territory lines. It was a clean way to exile someone while keeping every hand spotless. Later that same afternoon, the notice arrived folded in cream paper with the council seal pressed deep into blue wax. Lillian read it at her kitchen table, the same table where her mother used to write letters no one answered. Participation required. Refusal to appear would constitute voluntary separation from pack authority. The language was so neat it almost hid the cruelty. Almost. Mara begged her not to go. Then Mara begged her to run. There was a bus station 30 miles south, she said, and an aunt in Vermont, who would take them both for a few weeks. Lillian had looked at the window above the sink, at the thin frost feathering the glass, at the empty hook where her mother's coat used to hang. Running sounded simple only to people who had somewhere to arrive. Lillian had $27 in a jar, one spare pair of boots, and no legal papers outside Grey Hollow. The pack had made sure of that, too. So now she climbed the Moon Hall steps in front of everyone who had mistaken her quiet for surrender. At the top, Serena gave her a look full of soft pity, the kind that asked to be admired for not becoming laughter. Elder Marcus lowered his staff until its silver tip touched the stone between them. "You understand why you are here, Miss Harper," he said, his voice carrying just far enough for the first row to hear. Lillian looked past him into the candlelit hall, where the trial circle waited under the open roof and the moon shone down as pale and patient as a verdict. "Yes," she said. But beneath her sleeve, the crescent mark warmed again, and this time it felt less like knocking and more like an answer. For one breath after Lillian answered, nothing moved. Then the Moon Hall seemed to gather itself around her. The doors opened wider, and the sound inside changed before she understood why. Conversations that had been moving softly beneath the rafters stopped all at once, not fading, not thinning, but cutting cleanly away, as if a hand had passed over every mouth in the room. Lillian looked beyond Elder Marcus, and saw the hall in full for the first time that night. It was older than every building in Grey Hollow, built from grey stone hauled down from the ridge more than 200 years ago, with an open circle in the roof where moonlight fell straight onto the trial floor. 12 iron candle stands burned around the circle. White banners hung between the pillars. The front rows were filled with council families, elders, ranked wolves, and visiting pack leaders, who had come to witness Serena Pike become what everyone had already decided she was. But no one was looking at Serena now. Every face had turned toward the far entrance, where the western doors had opened without announcement. Lillian felt him before she saw him. It was not a scent, not exactly, because her senses had never worked the way a proper wolf's should. It was pressure. The air grew heavier over her shoulders. The candle flames leaned inward, small gold points bending toward the same unseen gravity. Even the moonlight in the center of the room seemed to sharpen, turning the silver lines in the floor brighter than they had been a moment before. A man stepped into the hall with 2 guards behind him. And no need for either of them. He wore a black coat cut with military plainness, a dark shirt beneath it, and a silver signet at his throat shaped like a wolf's head under a crescent moon. He was tall, but it was not his height that made the room change. It was the stillness around him, the kind that belonged to someone who never had to hurry, because the world had learned to make space before he arrived. Alpha King Caleb North did not look like the stories painted him. He did not wear a crown. He did not raise his voice. He did not enter as if he wanted admiration. He entered as if admiration was irrelevant and truth was the only thing worth crossing a room for. One by one, the wolves in the front rows lowered their eyes. Serena dipped into a graceful curtsy, her silk skirt whispering across the stone. Elder Marcus bowed with the exact depth required by law and not an inch more. Lillian forgot to move. She should have lowered her gaze. Everyone knew that. Omegas bowed first, wolfless Omegas even faster, because respect was safer when offered before anyone asked. But Caleb North's eyes moved across the hall with quiet attention, not passing over people so much as measuring the space between what they showed and what they hid. He looked at Serena, and his expression did not change. He looked at Elder Marcus, and something in the elder's jaw tightened. Then his gaze reached Lillian. It was not dramatic. No one gasped. The candles did not flare. Yet Lillian felt the moment with such force that her fingers curled inside her gloves. For half a second, the Alpha King stopped. Not his body, exactly. His body remained composed, his steps steady, his face unreadable. But something in his eyes paused, as if he had come expecting a ceremony and found a question waiting at the top of the steps. Lillian had spent her life being glanced at, categorized, dismissed, or pitied. This was different. Caleb North looked at her as though she was not an error in the room, but the part of the room everyone else had failed to understand. Elder Marcus noticed. Lillian saw it in the quick movement of his hand around the trial staff. Serena noticed too, because her polished smile thinned. Before she restored it, Caleb continued forward until he reached the center aisle, and the hall remained silent enough for Lillian to hear the faint brush of his coat and the low settling of old wood in the rafters above. When he spoke, his voice was calm, deep, and carrying, not loud because it did not need to be. "Begin in proper order," he said. Then his eyes returned to Lillian's covered wrist, just briefly, just long enough for the crescent mark beneath the wool to warm as if it had heard him. Serena entered the trial circle, as if the moonlight had been arranged for her personally. The hem of her white silk dress touched the silver line in the floor, and the 12 candles around the circle lifted at once, their flames growing taller without a sound. A soft murmur moved through the hall, admiration pretending to be reverence. Serena lowered her lashes, raised both hands, and let the light find her. It spilled over her hair first, turning every pinned moonstone into a small star. Then it slid down her sleeves, gathered at her palms, and bloomed outward in a pale shimmer that shaped itself behind her like the shadow of a wolf. Not a full wolf, not solid, not alive, but close enough for the front rows to exhale with satisfaction. Elder Marcus smiled for the first time that night. There, his expression seemed to say, "Order. Proof. The world exactly as he had promised it would be." Serena's mother pressed a handkerchief to her mouth. Someone whispered blessed. Someone else whispered Luna. Serena did not look at Lillian, which was worse than looking. She kept her face lifted toward the open roof, beautiful and calm, the picture of a girl who had never had to wonder whether the world would make room for her. When the light faded, it left a silver glow beneath her feet, a mark of acceptance bright enough for everyone to see. Elder Marcus struck the staff once against the floor. Serena Pike, recognized by moonlight, eligible for lunar consideration, confirmed under council witness. Applause broke softly through the hall, restrained because this was ceremony, but pleased because everyone understood the story being told. Then Marcus turned. "Miss Harper," he said. The applause ended too quickly. Lillian felt the silence reach for her before she moved. She stepped into the circle and became aware of every ordinary thing about herself. The worn grey gloves, the plain dark dress Mara had brushed clean that morning, the scuffed black shoes she had polished until the leather could do no better, the loose strand of hair at her cheek that refused to stay pinned. She had never felt poor standing in her own kitchen, or walking through the pines, or carrying laundry warm from the line. But under the moon hall's open roof, beside Serena's fading silver glow, every plain thing about her seemed to have been called as a witness. Lillian placed her feet where Serena's had been. The stone was cold through the soles of her shoes. Elder Marcus lifted his staff. "Present your wolf," he said. "Not begin, not breathe, not take your time. Present your wolf," as though he had asked her to place an empty bowl on a table. Lillian closed her eyes. She tried, not because she expected anything, but because some small stubborn part of her refused to let them say she had not even tried. She searched inward for the heartbeat others described, for the warmth, the answering presence, the second self waiting beneath skin and bone. There was only darkness. No growl. No shape. No rush of power. Nothing rose behind her. Nothing answered her name. From the edge of the circle came the first quiet laugh, quickly swallowed. Then another. Lillian opened her eyes and looked at the moon instead of the crowd. Her throat hurt, but her face remained still. Elder Marcus let the silence stretch, until it became its own kind of verdict. "The council recognizes no active wolf, no moon response, no trial claim," he said, each phrase clean and final. "This is the distinction between blessing and defect." The word moved through the room like a cold draft. Defect. Lillian did not flinch. She only lowered her left hand to her wrist, pressing her thumb against the crescent mark beneath the glove. For one terrible second, nothing happened. Then the stone under her feet gave a sound so soft it might have been imagined, like ice beginning to remember spring. The sound beneath Lillian's shoes was small enough that half the hall missed it. The other half heard it and decided, very quickly, that they had not. Lillian felt the floor change before she saw anything, a faint loosening under the old stone, not breaking, not shifting, but waking. Her thumb pressed harder against the mark on her wrist. The crescent beneath the wool warmed until the heat spread into her palm, and a thread of silver light appeared at the edge of her left shoe. It was thin as a sewing needle and pale as frost on a window. For one breath, it did nothing but exist. Then it began to move. It slipped along the engraved line Serena had stood on moments earlier, but instead of following the circle, it turned away from the approved path and ran toward the center of the trial floor, where the oldest symbols had been worn nearly smooth by generations of feet. Someone in the second row stood too fast, the chair legs scraping across stone. Elder Marcus brought the staff down sharply. "The ceremony is concluded," he said. His voice was still controlled, but the control had edges now. "The hall has recorded its answer." Lillian should have stepped back. Every habit in her body told her to obey, to lower her eyes, to become small enough that the danger might pass over her. But the light had reached the center mark, and the air above it had begun to shimmer. Not brightly. Not beautifully. Strangely. Like heat rising off an empty road in August, except the hall was cool, and the moonlight had gone almost white. Serena's glow faded first from beneath her feet. She looked down, and for the first time all night, uncertainty touched her perfect face. The wolf shadow behind her, the one everyone had admired, thinned at the ears, then along the spine, then vanished as if the moon had changed its mind. A murmur spread through the front rows. Elder Marcus turned toward Serena, so quickly his robe pulled tight across his shoulders. "Do not move," he said, but it was not clear whether he meant Serena or Lillian. Then the bell rang again. This time it was not soft. The sound rolled from the tower above the open roof, and came down through the hall like a deep breath released after years of being held. The candles bowed inward. The white banners lifted though there was no wind. In the back row, an old man with silver hair and a cane rose slowly to his feet. Thomas Reed had kept the pack archives for almost 40 years, and spoke so rarely that children thought his voice had been left behind in one of the dusty rooms he guarded. Now his face had gone pale. "That is not a trial response," he said. The words were quiet, but the silence carried them. Elder Marcus looked at him with open warning. "Sit down, Thomas." Old Thomas did not sit. His eyes stayed on Lillian's wrist. "That is a recall." Lillian did not know what the word meant, but Marcus did. So did Caleb North. The Alpha King stood, and the movement changed the hall more than the bell had. No one else moved after that. Caleb stepped down from the witness platform, not hurried, not alarmed, but with a focus so complete that even the elders seemed to lose the right to breathe loudly. "Explain," he said. Marcus tightened his grip on the staff. "A residue reaction. Old stone sometimes remembers old ceremonies. There is no cause for concern." The silver thread widened under Lillian's feet. It branched into 3 lines, then 7, each one finding a symbol hidden under dust and age. The markings were not random. They formed a crescent around her, open toward the moon. Lillian felt something answer inside her chest, not a voice, not yet, but a presence turning over in the dark like an animal waking in a room that had been locked too long. She inhaled, and the hall inhaled with her. Serena took one step back. The light followed Lillian instead. Marcus raised the staff again, higher this time. "By council authority, I suspend this proceeding." The silver lines flashed once, gentle but absolute, and the staff's moonstone went dark in his hand. For the first time in Lillian's life, Elder Marcus Vale looked at her not as if she were empty, but as if something inside her had just remembered his name. For several seconds, no one spoke, because there are silences that belong to confusion and silences that belong to fear, and this one had become the second kind. Lillian stood in the crescent of silver lines with her hand still pressed to her wrist, feeling the warmth beneath the wool grow steadier, deeper, less like a spark and more like a pulse. She wanted to pull the glove off. She wanted to run from the hall. She wanted, with a sudden ache so sharp it almost felt like grief, to hear her mother say there has been a mistake one more time. Caleb North stopped at the edge of the trial circle. He did not step into the light, and somehow that restraint made the room more tense than if he had. His gaze moved from the darkened moonstone in Marcus Vale's staff to the markings forming around Lillian's feet. Old Thomas Reed came forward slowly, his cane touching the floor in careful taps that sounded too loud in the frozen hall. Every eye followed him. Thomas had been old for as long as Lillian could remember, but now he seemed less frail than ancient, like one of the locked archive cabinets had learned to walk. Elder Marcus shifted to block him. "This is not your place." Thomas looked at him, and something tired moved across his face. "No," he said. "That is what you told me 22 years ago." The words passed through the crowd like a draft finding every loose window. Lillian's breath caught. 22 years was her entire life. Marcus turned pale around the mouth, but his voice remained smooth. "Archivist Reed is confused. The hour has been long, and ceremony can make old memories unreliable." Thomas reached inside his coat and drew out a narrow leather booklet tied with faded blue cord. The sight of it changed Marcus more than the bell, more than the light, more than Caleb standing. For the first time, the elder looked not offended, not stern, but exposed. "This was sealed under emergency council order," Thomas said. "I was told the child had not survived the fever." Lillian felt the floor tilt though it did not move. Caleb's voice cut through the hall, quiet and exact. "Which child?" Thomas looked at her then, not with pity, not with shock, but with recognition so late it hurt to receive. "Margaret Harper's daughter," he said. "Born under a full moon, during the northern eclipse. Registered for 12 minutes as moon-responsive before the record was amended." Lillian heard Mara gasp somewhere behind the pillars. Serena's face had lost all its ceremonial softness. Marcus lifted his hand. "Enough." Caleb did not look at him. "Read it." Thomas untied the cord. His fingers trembled, but his voice did not. "Female infant, Lillian Harper. Omega classification, pending divine mark review. Unusual internal wolf pressure observed. Moon seal present on left wrist. Protective containment requested by Senior Elder Marcus Vale until further council study." The words did not make sense all at once. They arrived like pieces of furniture in a dark room, shapes Lillian recognized only after stumbling into them. Internal wolf pressure. Moon seal. Protective containment. She pulled at her glove before she could stop herself. The gray wool caught at the thumb, then slid free. The crescent mark on her wrist was no longer pale. It shone silver-white beneath the open roof, clean and bright against her skin, the curve of it perfect, as if it had been placed there by a hand that never made mistakes. The hall recoiled without moving. Lillian stared at the mark, waiting to feel wonder, but what came first was anger, quiet and cold and terribly clear. She had not been empty. She had been locked. Caleb's eyes lifted to Marcus at last. "You sealed her, wolf," he said. It was not a question. Marcus looked around the hall, searching for authority in faces that had begun to turn away from him. "She was unstable," he said. "A child with that much moon response could have endangered the pack structure." Lillian laughed once, softly, not because anything was funny, but because the phrase was so perfectly him. Pack structure. Not her life. Not her mother. Not 22 years of being taught to apologize for an absence someone else had created. Beneath her ribs, the second heartbeat came again, slow and vast, and this time Lillian understood it was not knocking anymore. It was waiting for her to open the door. The door did not open all at once. It opened the way dawn comes through a shuttered room, first as a line, then as a widening, then as something no one can pretend is not light. Lillian stood in the center of the old symbols with her glove fallen at her feet, and the crescent mark shining on her wrist, and the second heartbeat inside her chest became a rhythm she somehow knew had always been there. The silver lines on the floor lifted into the air, not as flame, not as smoke, but as thin ribbons of moonlight that circled her without touching her skin. They moved slowly, carefully, almost respectfully. The hall watched in a silence so complete Lillian could hear the small uneven breath of Serena Pike near the witness seats. Then the moonlight changed. It spread across the open floor and rose into images, pale and trembling, like memories reflected on water. Lillian saw a kitchen she knew, the blue house on Juniper Road, the old table, the rain-blurred window, her mother younger and thinner than Lillian remembered, standing with one hand pressed over a folded blanket. Inside the blanket, a newborn child slept beneath moonlight pouring through the glass. Lillian understood before anyone said it. She was looking at the first night of her own life. Elder Marcus appeared in the memory wearing the same dark coat he still favored, though his hair had been black then and his face smoother. Two other elders stood behind him. Her mother held the baby closer and shook her head. No, Margaret Harper said, and the sound of her voice broke something open in Lillian so gently that tears came before she could stop them. She is not dangerous. She is my daughter. Marcus answered in the same polished tone he used now. She is a disruption the pack is not prepared to survive. The mark is not ordinary. If she reaches maturity with that wolf unbound, every false claim in this territory could be challenged. Every council appointment. Every lunar recognition. Every oath made under altered record. Margaret looked past him to Thomas Reed, younger then, standing at the doorway with an archive ledger in his hands and helplessness written across his face. Then she said the words Lillian had needed all her life, and had never known she was missing. My daughter is not empty. The image shifted. Moonlight showed a silver cord of ritual light drawn over the infant's wrist, the crescent mark dimming as the child slept on, unaware of what was being taken from her. There was no violence in it, no raised hand. No open cruelty. That almost made it worse. It was quiet. Official. Done by men who believed a clean room and proper words could make theft into duty. When the memory faded, the trial floor did not go dark. Instead, the light turned toward Serena. The silver charm at her throat, hidden beneath lace and moonstones, began to glow blue-white. Serena clutched it with both hands, but the ribbon snapped on its own and the charm rose into the air, turning slowly for all to see. Elder Marcus closed his eyes for one brief second, as if he could already feel the future changing shape. Old Thomas whispered, "Blood charm." The words landed harder than a shout. Serena's mother sat down, as though her knees had forgotten her. Serena looked at Caleb North, then at the elders, then at Lillian, and for the first time, her pity was gone. In its place was fear, small and human and almost childlike. I did not know, she said. No one answered her, because the hall had turned back to Lillian. The light behind her gathered into a shape. At first it was only brightness, too pale to name. Then ears formed, then shoulders, then the long lifted head of a wolf made entirely of white moonlight. It stood taller than any shadow Serena had cast, calm and immense, its eyes the same silver as the mark on Lillian's wrist. The creature did not snarl. It did not threaten. It simply looked across the council seats, and every elder who had signed the sealed order lowered their gaze, as if the truth itself had become too bright to face. Caleb North stepped closer to the circle, his expression changed at last, not softened exactly, but struck with recognition. Moonborn, he said. The word traveled through the hall like a key turning in a lock. Lillian felt the white wolf breathe behind her, and beneath her ribs, the answer came clear and steady, not as a voice from somewhere else, but as the part of herself that had waited 22 years to be welcomed home. The word moonborn did not echo. It settled. It entered the stone, the candles, the white banners, the faces of the people who had spent years believing the council, because belief was easier than apology. Lillian stood beneath the open roof with the white wolf at her back and the crescent mark bright on her wrist, and for the first time in her life, no one seemed to know where to place her. Not in the back row. Not by the service door. Not under defective, unsuitable, restricted, or any of the other careful words that had been built around her like a fence. Elder Marcus found his voice before anyone else did, because men like him often mistook speed for authority. This display is unauthorized, he said, turning toward the council benches, as if the old habit of obedience might still save him. The record has been compromised by emotional influence and unstable moon response. I call for immediate suspension and private review. The phrase private review moved through Lillian like a winter draft under a locked door. Private was where things disappeared. Private was where signatures changed, ledgers closed, mothers were told to stop asking, and little girls grew up apologizing for silence someone else had made inside them. Caleb North stepped into the trial circle before Marcus could say more. The silver lines did not reject him. They widened, not enough to claim him, but enough to let him pass. The white wolf behind Lillian turned its head toward him, and every ranked wolf in the hall felt the shift, because their shoulders lowered before they understood why. Caleb stopped beside Lillian, not in front of her. That mattered. He did not block the room from seeing her. He did not make himself the answer to a question that had always belonged to her. He looked at Marcus, then at the darkened moonstone in the elder's staff. You called her unstable when she was an infant, he said. You called her defective when the seal you requested did what it was made to do. You called her ineligible after hiding the record that proved otherwise. His voice remained calm, but calm from Caleb North did not feel gentle. It felt like a door closing on every escape route. Marcus lifted his chin. I acted to preserve pack order. Caleb's eyes moved to the council benches, where 3 elders had gone very still. Pack order is not preserved by burying a child's name. A soft sound came from the crowd, not applause, not agreement, but recognition beginning to break loose after years of being trained quiet. Mara was crying near the pillars, one hand over her mouth, though her eyes were bright with something stronger than sadness. Old Thomas held the open booklet against his chest, as if it had become heavy with all the years it had waited to be read. Serena stood alone beside her mother, the broken blood charm lying at her feet like a pretty lie that had finally run out of light. Marcus struck the staff against the floor again, but without its moonstone, the sound was ordinary wood on stone. I demand council protection. Caleb looked at Lillian then. Not past her. Not over her. At her. His expression asked a question without taking the choice from her. Lillian understood. The old fear rose first, because fear always arrives early, trained by repetition. Then something deeper rose beneath it, patient and white and steady. She turned her wrist upward. The crescent mark brightened. The silver lines around the circle moved toward the council benches, and stopped at the feet of every elder who had signed the sealed order. No one was touched. No one was forced. But each name appeared in moonlight on the floor, written in clean script for the entire hall to read. Marcus Vale. Helen Pike. Robert Crane. Samuel Orr. The hall went utterly silent. Caleb lowered himself to one knee beside the glowing crescent, and the sound that passed through the crowd was not shock exactly. It was the sound of a world rearranging itself. The moon does not answer a defect, he said. It answers its heir. Lillian felt the words enter her slowly, almost too large to hold. He rose and faced the hall. By ancient law and witnessed moon response, Lillian Harper has the right to complete this trial, reopen her sealed record, and challenge every claim made under false authority. No one spoke against him. Not because they feared the Alpha King, though many did, but because the moonlight itself remained around Lillian, calm and undeniable. Elder Marcus looked smaller then, not physically, but in the way a shadow becomes ordinary when someone finally lights the room. Lillian looked at the white wolf beside her and felt, for the first time, not rescued, but returned. Lillian completed the trial not by shifting, not by proving herself in the way the elders had taught the pack to expect, but by standing still while the moonlight finished naming what had been hidden. One by one, the sealed records opened across the trial floor in silver script, not only hers, but others too, old classifications, altered claims, quiet removals, small cruelties written in official language and stored where ordinary people could not reach them. The hall did not erupt. It softened. That was stranger and somehow harder to bear. People who had laughed into their sleeves now looked at their hands. Mothers pulled daughters closer. Ranked wolves who had nodded along to council decisions for years stared at the floor as if realizing how many lives had been reduced to ink and signatures. Lillian watched it all with the white wolf breathing beside her, immense and calm, and understood that truth did not always arrive like thunder. Sometimes it arrived like a door unlocking in a quiet house. Elder Marcus said nothing after his name appeared. The authority had gone out of him without a single dramatic gesture. He was escorted from the council bench by order of ancient law, not through shame staged for the crowd, but through procedure finally used for something honest. Serena Pike remained near the witness seats, her face pale, her charm broken, her future no longer arranged neatly before her. When her eyes met Lillian's, there was no apology yet, only the stunned beginning of one. Lillian let that be enough for now. She had spent too much of her life making other people comfortable with what they had taken from her. Caleb North did not ask her for gratitude. That may have been the first reason she trusted him. After the final silver line faded from the floor, he offered his hand, palm open, not reaching, not claiming, simply there if she wanted it. Lillian looked at his hand, then at the hall, then at the place where her mother's memory had stood in moonlight. She placed her bare hand in his, and the crescent mark on her wrist cooled for the first time all night. Outside, the September air smelled of pine and chimney smoke. Again, ordinary and impossible. Mara reached her first at the bottom of the steps and wrapped her in a trembling embrace that made Lillian close her eyes. "You were never empty," Mara whispered. Lillian had no answer. She only held on. By dawn, the council chamber had been opened. By noon, Thomas Reed had placed her mother's original letters on the table in front of her, each one carefully preserved, each one unanswered. Lillian read them in a room with tall windows while Caleb stood at the far side, quiet as winter sunlight, giving her the dignity of not being watched too closely while she grieved. When he finally spoke, it was not about bonds or destiny, or all the stories people would already be telling. It was a practical question. "What do you want done first?" Lillian looked at the letters, at her mother's handwriting, at the name Harper written again, and again like a prayer that had taken 22 years to reach someone willing to hear it. She asked for 3 things. Every sealed Omega record would be reopened. Every trial classification, made under Marcus Vale's authority, would be reviewed. And the Moon Hall would no longer belong only to elders who feared what the moon might reveal. Caleb listened without interruption, then nodded once. "It will be done." Months later, when snow covered the pines and the village roofs shone white under a clear December moon, Lillian stood again in the Moon Hall. Not at the edge. Not as a contrast for someone else's glory. She stood in the center circle, while a young Omega, with shaking hands, stepped forward to have her record read honestly for the first time. Caleb waited behind Lillian, not close enough to overshadow her, close enough that his presence felt like a wall at her back and an open road ahead. The white wolf rested in the moonlight at her side, no longer locked, no longer silent. Lillian looked at the girl before her and heard her own voice come out steady, gentle, and certain. "Begin when you are ready. The moon will answer what is true."